ahead and go to our next conversation. This is Antonio in Florida. Antonio, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, gentlemen. How you doing?
I am good. How are you?
Good. No complaints.
Cool. So what do you want to talk to us about today?
So, just want to get some background information on you guys in terms of which argument or which fact or which observation convinced you that there are no gods and/or God.
Ooh, from the get-go, I don't know if I'm convinced that there are no gods.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I'm just not really convinced that there is one. And so I take a step back from that and say, you know what, I don't think that I could possibly demonstrate that there isn't any kind of God. So I have to reserve judgment on that and say I don't have any evidence for anything out there right
And
now.
it also depends on how you define God. For example, you can define God as energy, and I'll say, yeah, energy exists. Yeah. So then, therefore, I believe in God, but that's not, what most people will say. I will say I'm pretty convinced that the Christian God isn't real, and I'm willing to go that far. I'm willing to say that the Christian God isn't real, and many modern conceptions of him and other kinds of gods. But if you define some God that's untestable, unverifiable in any way, I can't say whether he exists or not.
Can't talk about that anymore. It doesn't work.
There's just no way to verify it. So.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Christian God, and we can go with that one. What convinced you that is not real, or that God is not real?
Yeah, you want to start with this one? Or
I think there is logical inconsistencies, basically demonstrating that there is. Oh, you got a little noise on your end, bud. I think that there's logical inconsistencies that basically make it to where we can determine that there is not, at least the Christian God is not omnipotent or is not omnibenevolent. I think there's all kinds of ways to show that all of the omnis that the Christian God demands are nonsensical.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that you can look at the characteristics of this God and say that those characteristics are not existent, but can you prove that, or does that? So how would you go further to say that because the characteristics of the God are inaccurate based on whatever scriptures or whatever believers might think, that therefore there is no God, there is no Christian God? Why isn't it just that you're wrong about his benevolence, or you're wrong about his omnipresence or his omniscience? Sure. Why wouldn't you just stop at those attributes?
Yeah,
instead of
Good question. So do you believe that there is such a thing as a single bachelor?
So basically you're saying the inconsistencies make it impossible for it to exist? I would love for you to give me that one characteristic that shows it doesn't exist.
I would actually backtrack because if we're talking about specific claims from specific gods, and we're talking about the Christian God.
We're talking specifically about the Christian God.
Right, exactly. So the Christian God has specific claims to its existence and has like lots and lots of attributes and things that he has done on earth. For example, there are people who say, I prayed for Drew over here and he has been healed, by the grace of God and this and that. Whereas there's other natural explanations that can cover that, or either that, or there's events that have been described, particularly in scriptures, that have either were misconstrued wildly or just never even happened. And so if that's going to qualify whether or not a God is real, for example, if we're talking about Jesus Christ rising from the dead and that never happened, well, then I'm going to say that, Christianity is at least false in some way. And if there is a God, then he is not the God that's being described in the Bible or, any other kind of Christian conception of him.
Okay, great. So you said if there is a God, he's not the one described in the Bible. So we know that he can still exist even if all the attributes are incorrect, correct?
Well, if he's not the Christian God, then what is he? Right? He's something else.
No, he's a God. He doesn't have to be. My question is, what argument convinced you that the Christian God does not exist? And you can't tell me that the inconsistencies of the attributes are what convinced you that he entirely does not exist. You have to tell me what convinced you that the entity of God does not exist. Not his qualities, not his attributes, not his personality. What about...
But that's what he is. How can you say that we can't use those things if we're not...
Well, you're objecting to that
Yeah.
because you know that's as far as your argument goes. You can't take it any farther than we don't think he's benevolent, we don't think he's omnipresent, we don't think he's omniscient. Doesn't mean he didn't create the world. Doesn't mean he did not create the world. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Well,
Doesn't
if
mean
the Christians claim that God
Go ahead.
created the world a certain way, and we find out through natural methods that that's actually not true, then I would say that.
You hypothesize. You cannot prove the way that.
Well, let me ask you this: how do you know that you're not
Yeah, go ahead.
hypothesizing about God? What's the difference?
I'm asking you the question.
Sure,
what
but-
convinced you that God doesn't exist? Does not exist.
Well, let's stick to one topic at a time because
That's the topic.
you're making claims here that you actually know more about the Christian God than I do, or at least
No,
there's
my
something about
question
him
is
that
what
you know is
what
true.
argument- No. My question is, what argument convinced you that God does not exist?
Again,
Not the attribute.
but
Not the attribute.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I can have-
I
cover
think
this.
there's
Someone-
confusion because I think we covered this because we're talking about the Christian God.
If someone says Antonio has 2 arms and only have 1 arm, doesn't preclude me from existing. That would be an attribute error, correct?
If
Antonio,
it's a little-
Antonio has blue eyes. Antonio doesn't have blue eyes. He has brown eyes.
Yeah.
Your argument has to convince me that I don't exist.
What if we defined
God
that
doesn't exist.
necessarily and Antonio has 2 arms and has blue eyes?
No,
What if
no,
we
no, no,
define
we're not-
necessarily that is the case? Because isn't that how the
talking
Christian God is
Christian
defined
God.
as being omnipresent, omnibenevolent,
Creator of the
omniscient?
universe. But he has many attributes, right? He has.
But yeah, those
He's
are some of his
omniscient,
attributes, and if you
Right.
show that those don't actually exist or those are nonsensical, then his attributes are nonsensical.
Yeah.
There you go. He has nonsensical attributes, and
Well, what you can say is that people have interpreted his attributes incorrectly because it can be nonsensical, but it doesn't preclude him from existing.
Okay,
But
so-
you have to go as far as showing that he exists in the first place.
yeah. So humans could be wrong, therefore.
Yeah.
I guess we
So
could be wrong
your
about it, but
argument
Yeah.
is that we could be wrong that he exists. That's your entire argument. That's what you base your life on.
no, I don't. I'm not saying that we could be wrong, and I thought I was just trying to repeat back what I thought that you had said. That you could be wrong about that. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the attributes are not attributes do not make a guy, right?
But okay, so
They
if
are
we have
qualities of
wrongful
God.
interpretations, let's say every single attribute we know about this God is wrong, then we don't know anything about him. Right?
Not necessarily, because with the God label, he still had to be the creator, right? That's the one thing of a God, of the God.
But that's an
God
attribute.
created everything. Yeah. Creator.
Okay.
You can't.
But let's say, well, I mean, why does he have to be a creator?
Yeah.
There are gods that aren't creators all the time.
The only way to get the God attribute, which is the Christian God.
Okay.
That's what we're arguing for.
Right.
Okay.
Is to be
Yeah.
the creator.
So would you say that if the Christian God, wasn't a creator, if we could demonstrate that there wasn't a Christian God, there wasn't a creator, would that show that the Christian God doesn't actually exist?
Yeah, that would probably be the
Okay.
one attribute that you would need to prove.
Okay, so
God does not have
that
or
one
does not
attribute
exist.
supersedes all of the other attributes that I listed. So basically, if we disprove that
agree?
attribute, then that will make it to where we can disqualify all the other attributes from defining him into existence. But if I give
Well,
my attributes, which I think that disprove his existence, no, those are unnecessary.
Yeah.
So why is
What
it
I'm
being a
saying-
creator more necessary than being omnipresent, omnibenevolent, like the Bible defines the Christian God to be?
Not that they're not necessary. They're inconsequential to the existence of God. That's the whole point.
Well, I think that a creator
Right.
God is inconsequential to the existence of God. What if I said that?
Yeah.
Can you prove that? Or can you make a logical argument for that to be the case?
Nope. Can you? For yours?
You just made a nonsensical argument, and you want me to make an argument for the case of the creator God not
Yes,
being the God?
we don't believe in God, so you would have to make the case that the God exists.
No.
Yes.
The whole point is what argument? Well, I'll repeat the whole argument. What argument convinced you that God does not exist? And what you started with was the incongruent attributes of God. That has nothing to do with the existence of God. We all agree
Okay,
with that.
existence
Again,
is an attribute, correct? Can we go there?
Can you?
How about that?
You can. If you go there, can you make it work?
Yeah, I don't see or feel or touch
All right,
or
go.
do
So
anything
what
with
argument
God.
proves that God? So what argument proves that God doesn't exist? That's pretty much.
You're kind of arguing backwards.
Yeah, we
because
covered that.
The burden of proof lies on the person making the claim.
Okay. No. I asked you what argument convinced you that the Christian God doesn't exist. You were willing to take on that argument, right?
Yes.
And we did.
We did.
The attributes of omnipresence or omnibenevolence prove that God did not create the world.
That's not what you asked us. God existence, not whether God created the world.
Existence, exactly.
Those are two different things.
You understand this. You understand this. If he is not omnipresent, does that mean he did not create the world?
No, but I'm
perfect.
kind of confused.
Now, exactly.
So what we end up saying here is
Yeah.
what it's coming down to is we're saying that all the omnis, if we can show that those are nonsensical, then that means that the Christian God doesn't exist. And he says, no, those are inconsequential to the existence of God. I asked if we could disprove that God was, or there was a creator, then that would disprove the Christian God. And I then asked, why is being a creator more important of an attribute than being being omnipresent, being omnibenevolent, all of the other ways that God's described in the Bible? And I haven't gotten an answer on that.
Well, the answer is very simple. He could be malevolent and the creator. He could be non-omnipresent. I don't know what the opposite of omnipresent would be, but he could be local only and still be the creator. He could be not whatever.
Yeah.
Omniscient.
Yeah. Sure. So
He could still
conceivably,
be the creator, correct?
there could be something that we could call God that isn't all of those things, right?
Yes.
Well, you know what?
Absolutely.
Conceivably, there could be something that's not a creator. We could still call it God, right?
I mean, not if we're going to follow the classical definition of God, which
Well,
God.
you
which
just
is the
made my
Christian God.
argument for me.
We're
The logical
following-
definition of God possesses all those omnis. There you go.
No. You want to get out of this so bad, so desperately, but I just asked if you just pose an argument that convinced you that God doesn't exist.
And I did.
You
And
want-
then I
you
used
want-
your
you
argument
want-
to let you know that you're making a
No,
nonsensical
you
argument
didn't.
at this
No, you
point.
didn't.
Sorry.
You watch enough Jordan Peterson, because I've watched your videos, to analyze a well-constructed argument and someone who is being disingenuous and dishonest.
But here's the
You've
thing.
done enough of that analysis.
We can't make the argument that God doesn't exist until we know what that God is. We have to define what that God is first
God,
before we can do
Christian
that.
God, Christian God.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
God, we already established that.
yes, and so as we've said before, and we'll go through this
Which argument
one more
proves that he
time
doesn't
here
exist?
because I don't want to keep going in the loop of the conversations. There are certain
He presented an
attributes, and I would add claims of the existence of the Christian God that we would know that he exists based on things that only he could do that would help us determine, that that's him, that we don't find to be convincing. That, Christians through history have made claims about this God that we just, don't see. Either there's logical consistencies or there's empirically wrong, data about them. Like if we're talking about, there are some Christians that believe God created the earth 6,000 years ago. Well, that doesn't match up with, the data that we have through these other methods. And we find the methods that we find more convincing, we find them convincing because they're more reliable in showing us other conclusions. So
you don't have any arguments that disprove the existence of God. You just have a lot of data that you either disagree with or don't believe.
So not
right?
any that satisfy you, given the fact that we.
I just want to hear your point of view to the point that that you've made
I think you want to hear our point of view from your framework.
Yeah,
and
we've
we're
given
not,
our point of view.
No.
Yeah.
I would love to hear why you're so convinced that God doesn't exist when 98% of the world, for all of humanity, believes that there is a God and or God.
Has 98% of humanity ever been wrong about anything?
It doesn't matter.
Yes,
But
it does
in this
matter
particular
because
case,
the consensus doesn't define
number
what's true about reality.
Number one, in this particular case, all of humanity, for nearly all of humanity,
No.
all of history,
That's
have
not
belief
true.
in a God and or God.
Look.
And you have figured out with your limited knowledge
Antonio.
that there is no God.
Antonio, are Drew and I part of humanity?
You're
Yes,
in that
okay,
2%
so
that
all
don't
of
believe in a God.
humanity has not come
The
to the
rest of us-
conclusion that God
Yeah, yeah.
exists. And by the way,
Okay, good.
using arguments
Point
from
made, point made.
consensus.
Only
No,
98%.
okay, well, I will drop you in a second if you don't let me talk. Okay?
No problem. The D-bag approach is a great argument.
It's not a D-bag approach, man. I think we've been very... Look, if Matt Dillahunty was here, you'd be gone like 10 minutes ago. All right? Let's be
guess
real.
What? His D-bag
Yeah.
approach is the worst thing for atheism because we know he's just obfuscated and trying to escape the actual argument.
And
Okay.
I don't think your approach to theism is very good either. So we're just going to let you go and just end the conversation.
the-
I'm sorry that
one-
we had to do that, but...
One tip there, Antonio, is